It's time for Homeschool History.
Welcome back to another Homeschool Histories. Today we're going to talk about life as a colonist. So life in the colonies was mainly agricultural or made up of people who worked as farmers. In fact, 90% of the population were farmers. Let's compare that today where the percent of people who farm is less than 2%. So chances are, if you were a colonial child, you'd be in a family of farmers. The goal of most farmers was to be self-sufficient so that everything they needed to eat, drink, and wear was produced on their own farm. Homes for most families at this time would have consisted of a single room with maybe a loft. All cooking, eating, and sleeping took place in this one-room home. The parents would sleep in a bigger bed in one part of the room. Sometimes the kids might sleep in a trundle bed that could be pulled out from under their parents' beds. Other times, they might have a ladder that would go up to a loft and they'd all sleep up there. You kept warm and cooked your food over a fireplace. Colonists would hang heavy iron pots over the fireplace to cook. As you can imagine, cooking was kind of dangerous. You could get burns or seriously injure your back just from lifting that heavy pot. As a child in colonial America, your day would start pretty early. You would get up with the sunrise and you would have lots of chores that had to be completed every day. You might need to chop wood, feed the farm animals, help clear land for farming, do weeding, help with the crops, build needed items like fencing, tools, or furniture. You might be gathering eggs, spinning thread, weaving cloth, sewing clothes, making candles, soap, cleaning, cooking, or caring for younger children. If you were one of the few 10% who were not farmers, then you probably lived in one of the cities in the colony. Most cities in the colonies were near a waterfront, which allowed for the shipping of goods as well as fishing. In the cities, there were often marketplaces that wouldn't be too far from the docks, and this was a place where farmers and fishermen could come to sell their goods. This would be a social area too, a place where people could talk and gossip. The streets were generally going to be made of dirt or cobblestone, but there would be shops lining either side. You would have a blacksmith who would be forging tools, shoemakers, clockmakers, tailors, wig makers, and all kinds of craftsmen. One thing you probably would not have enjoyed about colonial life were the smells. Since they didn't have public sewage systems or public garbage disposal, you would find open sewers and rotting garbage. In this day and age, we would strongly object to those stenches, but the colonists would have been pretty used to it. Houses in cities would be close together, and a lot of them would have roofs made from thatch, which is pretty much straw and wheat reeds. Most homes would have either not have windows at all, or they'd have really small ones because glass was super expensive. Animals would be running loose in the street, and you would light your homes with candles or torches. As you can imagine, fire was a serious problem and concern. Although you had lots of work to do as a colonial kid, you also got to play lots of games. Some games you might be familiar with, like have you ever played hide and go seek, tag, hopscotch, puzzles, used a yo-yo, dominoes, marbles, leapfrog, spinning tops, or dolls? These are all games colonial kids would have done too. Knuckle Bones was a game played with marbles, pebbles, or even actual sheep knuckle bones. You would throw them up in the air, turn your hand over quickly, and catch as many as you could on the back of your hand. Nine Pins was a game that was an early version of bowling, but instead of trying to get really high scores, the first player to score exactly 31 points was the winner. Whirligig, or Button Spinner, was a game where you tried to see how long you could get a button looped through a string to twirl as you pulled your hands apart and moved them back together. Check out some of these games and try them at home, although I highly recommend using pebbles or marbles instead of sheep knuckle bones. What about school? In colonial times, most children were taught at home. There wasn't standardized public school systems like we have today. Most of their education would have been learning practical things like how to cook and grow food. Religious education was considered really important, and reading the Bible would have been a regular occurrence. Sometimes children would go to something called a dame school. This would be sort of like an elementary school run by a local woman or dame. But instead of having lots of teachers and grades, it was one teacher, and all learning levels would be taught in a single room. If you went to a school, the teaching was really religion focused, and the use of sermons in order to teach you would be common. They often used something that was called a hornbook. This was a wooden paddle with the alphabet on it and maybe the Lord's Prayer. Children could carry this on their belts. These types of schools were focused on teaching you reading, writing, and mathematics. This is a practical education to ensure you could read your Bible, write letters, and counts, and keep track of your own income and bills. If you came from a really wealthy family, you might have a tutor or governess that came into your home to teach you. If you had a tutor or governess, your education would probably be a little less focused on the practical. You would probably learn about classical literature, music, or foreign languages. What kind of pets might you have had if you were in colonial America? Some things would be similar to today. People had cats and dogs just like we do. They would have cats to help keep down their rat or mouse population, and dogs would be expected to help hunt or guard your home. We know that colonists really valued their pets, and one way that we know this is because they actually had laws telling us this. Did you know that the very first law concerning the mistreatment of animals in the U.S. history was in 1641 in the Massachusetts Bay Colony? It was the regulation against tyranny or cruelty. This law made it so that if you were deliberately cruel to an animal, it was punishable by fine or by times in the stock or pillories. Another way we know that pets were considered valuable by the colonists is because we actually have records of them offering rewards. In one record, it showed a reward of 20 shillings for a lost dog. Well, that's about 9 days worth of wages for a colonist. If we look at that in today's standards for minimum wage, that's a $500 reward. Deer were a really popular pet in colonial America. Colonists would actually give them collars and walk them on leashes just like a dog. We have portraits of these deer wearing collars and standing with their owners. We also have records of pet squirrels. A baby squirrel was actually more popular than a puppy or a kitten with colonial children. Colonists would steal baby squirrels from nests, raise them, domesticate them, and sell them in the marketplace. Like the deer, these squirrels were often given collars and even leashes. Squirrels could be trained to sit on children's shoulders as they walked through town. Lots of moms were not fans of the squirrels, as they had a tendency to chew through closets, clothing, and linens, and could chew their way out of wooden cages. Tinsmiths started creating and selling metal cages that had exercise wheels and everything to help keep squirrels from destroying homes. Here's a crazy pet, a beaver. Beavers could be trained to catch fish and carry them back to families. Otters could be trained to retrieve game like birds or fish that fell into the water. Raccoons were kept as pets, but they weren't as popular because they were notorious for breaking and entering into pantries to steal all the food. Wild birds were domesticated and kept in cages in drawing rooms, uh, almost as a fancy sort of decoration. Monkeys imported from other countries were kept as pets as well. They were very popular but caused an awful lot of mess and havoc in homes. Just like us, colonials loved the companionship of a wide variety of pets. If you were a colonial child, which pet do you think your family would have? So now let's talk about clothing. First off, something you might find interesting is that both boys and girls pretty much wore what you would consider kind of a long nightgown until they were between 4 to 7 years of age. Then boys were allowed to wear pants and girls began to dress more like their mothers. So the very first thing that they would wear when getting dressed would be a shift. This is a long shirt, probably has long sleeves, and it may go down as long as down to your knees. This was your shirt, your nightgown, and part of your dress, whether you're a boy or a girl. And here's something that you may find a little weird, but they didn't have underwear. Underwear hadn't been invented yet. So your shift was also your underwear. And you might only have 2 to 3 total because it was so expensive and took so long to make clothing. So you weren't wearing a clean shift every day. So first would go on your shift. Now, if you're a girl, next would go on something called petticoats. This is kind of like a slip, except with thicker material and lots of layers. Not only would that give you shape to your dress, but in the wintertime, it would help you stay warm. On top of that, you would put on your dress. This would go over your shift and your petticoats. Now you may just have a skirt and then wear like a vest over the top part of your shift, or if you were wealthier, you'd have a full-on dress like this. You'd also have an apron. Sometimes they're called a pinafore, and they were actually called that because at the time they didn't have safety pins and they'd use straight pins to pin them on. Also, your skirts didn't come with pockets. You would have to have a pocket that you tied around your waist underneath your petticoats and skirts, and those would have a slit in the side. So you'd reach your hand through the slits into the pocket that was tied around your waist. And to top all of that off, as a girl, you would have a very stylish cap. Yeah. Now, you may wonder, why was this such a stylish and fabulous thing to wear? Well, that would be because you only washed a couple times a year. Maybe only once a year. And this cap would look beautiful while hiding the fact that you had greasy, dirty hair. Also, it wasn't uncommon to have lice, and you didn't really want other people to see the lice hopping around on your head. So inside or outside, you'd wear a little cap. Now, if you're a boy that had been breeched or allowed to wear knee breeches, you'd start with that kind of long shift nightgown shirt. You put that on, then you put on breeches. These are pants that go down to about your knees. Then you'd wear long stockings. They're knitted. They're usually made out of linen or wool. That would go up to there, to your knee, meet your knee breeches. Over your shift, you would then have a vest that you would put on. Then on top of that, you would put on your coat. Again, long sleeves. In the summer, you're going to be hot. And last of all, your tricorn. This is the hat that was stylish at the time for men. Another thing that girls would wear as they got older that boys didn't have to wear was a device that would lace around you and you pull it really tight. It had whalebone in it. It was called a corset. The idea was they thought it would give you better posture and make you have a nicer female form. It also made it more difficult to breathe. If you were a colonial child, you'd get one pair of shoes. And they wouldn't be really great shoes because they didn't have left and right foot shoes at the time. It was one shoe for either foot. So I can't imagine that was very comfortable. But these would probably be black and they'd probably be made out of leather, and the bottoms would probably be wood. Well, thanks for joining us today for Homeschool Histories. We would like to thank all of the people that helped out with this episode, to include websites like the National Park Service, Arlington County Public School website, study.com, World History Encyclopedia, Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, and AmericanRevolution.org. I want to thank these websites for making great educational information available to the public. Next episode, we're going to be talking about forms of labor in the colonies.